Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. My name's Jared and today I'm going to do some work on my V35 Skyline. I've got some bits from GKTech which I want to put on. So this is what I picked up from GKTech. First I got this rear diff brace. So this converts the subframe as another pickup point, so the back of the diff has 2 points of support. The diff in the car only has the one stud holding it onto the subframe compared to the older S and R chassis that had the 2 studs. So there is a hole in there. Nissan put this hole, but they never actually added another stud on the diff. So if you're driving your car really hard or you're drifting it, it is known that that bush will fail and even the diff can fall out. On my car personally, the original bush was so worn, when you change gears you could actually feel the diff would actually clunk. So this gives the diff a bit more support for when you're changing gears and clutch kicking or doing burnouts, anything like that. So you get 2 bolts which go through the bottom part of this brace into the actual diff cover, and then this larger bolt that goes through the subframe into this top one. Then I got some shifter return springs and they come with this billet cap as well. So there's 2 different stiffness of springs. There's a soft and a stiff one, and a short and long one. So they're very specific what side they go on. I got this air freshener in the, obviously because Skyline. And then also I got these bushes. They're like an insert that goes in the void of the transmission mount. So I was a bit surprised. I was expecting they might have been aluminium, but they're actually like a stiff polyurethane. They're not like super stiff, but these just insert and take up that gap and that slack, which helps prevent some movement and rocking in the gearbox. So that one's a super quick, easy install. These ones are not too bad either. This one might be a bit more difficult for me just because I got my exhaust is going to be in the way. Oh, and I also picked up this shop flag with S15, 14, 180 and S13 coupe on it. Alright, first I'm going to start at the front of the car and I'll do the transmission mods first, and then we'll finish up on the diff. These are some paperwork that came with those springs. So you've got your 2 small and 2 large ones, 1.8, 2, 1.4 and 6, saying the left hand side is smaller and the right hand side's longer, and it's saying you've got to use 2 thick together or 2 thin together. Don't mix and match them because the shifter feel is going to be weird. So I'm going to start by dropping the transmission brace. I've just got a jack under it supporting it, and I'm slowly lowering both sides down just so it doesn't get jacked one side. And then you're going to take the middle bolt, which actually goes through the bush that we're going to be replacing. It is quite difficult if it's never come off to first get it off. It might be stuck, and just keep in mind there's this little tab here just to hold it in place. Then you can go ahead and insert both sides of the bush on the front and the back of that mount. Then it's just out of frame here just because there's not much room to film. I've cracked loose the bolt that's holding in the spring on the driver's side of the mount. So I've got the other spring in with the new cap. Trust me, it's very difficult considering the amount of room you've got there, and it's quite hard to film with the limited room I've got here at the moment. But I recommend releasing this wiring harness off the transmission there and popping it behind this little brace. A lot easier. The spring isn't as quite difficult to push in to get started as the other side. But yeah, it's certainly not easy to get any tools in there to do that one up. Brace back on and then bolt up both sides. So these are the two springs that came out of the transmission. I've already installed the stiffer ones, but just for comparison, that is the original one, which is quite springy, and this is the softer of the stiffer one. So you can see even here, and then the same, this one's quite stiff. It's actually stiffer than the longer one, and this one actually are quite similar actually, but this longer one is definitely stiffer, and the new one is actually shorter in length. Looks like the brace looks like this, and I think it's these two bolts here, this one and this one, that are gonna be removed, and I think it's gonna sit something like that behind the subframe, and then in that hole there, that like spare hole, I think that this collar is gonna insert there. So got the two 14s out, and these are the two bolts that are going to replace them, and they're going to go through like that, and they're long enough to bolt into the diff. So it's best to start with one bolt at a time, and I found it quite difficult to actually get it started by hand, so I had to use the open end of a ring spanner just to get it started, and then I used the ratchet end to put it home. Alright, I got those two bolts in. You sort of have to start them on a bit of an angle, and I would suggest using a ring spanner or combination spanner to get them started, and not just send them in with impact, because you could cross the threads. So I haven't done them up completely all the way. There's still a bit of gap there. Now I'm gonna put the spacer in the back and just situate that first, just in case I need to wiggle it around. This is a wrist washer. And bolt. And then the other side we got washer and then lock nut. This top bolt is also really quite difficult to get to, and get the open end of a ring spanner to do it up. And once you've got it in, you can finally bolt up the bottom two bolts. Final install. Skyline in the Skyline. Alright, so finished up with the mods for today. Can see the sun's just setting behind me. I'm gonna drive the car for a week, and then I'll close the video out after I've done some driving and actually test out those mods and see how they perform, and then I can give you my honest feedback. But in terms of installation, it probably took me about 2 hours to do all of that, but it is certainly not a fun install. Those springs, it's just, there's no room in the tunnel either side. On Sylvia's, it's so much easier to get to those bolts. There's just so much room. It's such a smaller gearbox. On this car, it's just so much bigger. And then obviously I struggled with that transmission brace for ages until I realized there was that metal like hook that holds it on. I just couldn't work out how to get it down. But once I realized you sort of got to rotate it to the left and then it comes down, that was quite easy. Those ones are pretty easy to install, but you'll need to support the transmission and then jack it back up in place after you've got that brace on. The rear diff brace, that was pretty easy to install, pretty straightforward, self-explanatory, but trying to line up that brace and just get those bolts started in the back of the diff, I guess that was probably the hardest part. Just because they're so long and I guess everyone's diff and their subframes might be slightly different. Just trying to get those bolts started was difficult, and I had to use a ring spanner to get them started. I couldn't screw them in by hand, so I was worried that I might strip those threads, but it all worked out. I took my time and got it in. So yeah, I'll go for a drive for the next week and then I'll fill you back in. Alright, so it's been a week now since I did the install with the diff brace and the transmission bush and also the return springs from the shifter. So you can definitely feel that it's more stiff left and right, but going into first and then to second is a bit more difficult because you have to apply more pressure to keep it over, because when you're going from first to second, now that the spring is stiffer, it wants to center itself. So I found that 1-2 shift is actually a little bit more difficult. Going to fifth and sixth seems to be easy, but for some reason first and second more stiff than fifth and sixth, but third and fourth is really easy. Going back from third into second is quite difficult now. You have to really slow down to get it to go in. Do a quick 1, 2, 3 here. And again, going into second, it's a bit slow now. So it's been a week and I showed you that driving clip of shifting between gears. So overall, initially I didn't really notice any difference with the diff mount and the transmission bush. Wasn't until sort of I started to drive a little bit harder and shifted a bit quicker and then dumped the clutch a bit that I noticed that the driveline just feels way more stable. I was sort of expecting maybe that diff bush was going to introduce a lot more noise into the car because it is solid mounted. They don't have, GKTech didn't design it with any provision for like a poly bush. I can't say that it made like a super huge difference. Like there is certainly some noticeable difference there, but I think in my regard, since I already had changed the diff bush to polyurethane mounts, it wasn't as noticeable. So perhaps if you still got your stock bush there, it's definitely a good starting point. In terms of the shifter return springs, I went ahead and just put the stiffer, larger ones in at the beginning, and I think I sort of regret that. I might go back to the softer ones they provide. The stiff ones feel a bit unevenly stiff, like I feel like they're slightly mismatched left and right. Going into fifth and sixth feels like really good, like no issues, almost like stock. but going to first and second, it's a lot more stiff, and you have to like really fight the shifter to hold it across when you're going from first to second. It's really nice when you pop out from second and go to third, but then also going from third back to second and getting it back across that gate, it actually feels slower now to shift. So for that reason, I'm gonna then again try, when I have some time, change the springs back out for the softer ones that they supplied. I think also if you're daily driving the car and you're doing a lot of first to second and you're sitting in stop-go traffic, probably the spring isn't for you, that stiff one. Probably stick with the softer one or even the OEM one, because it's going to get really boring quick. But if it's just a full track car and you're driving with aggression all the time, then probably the stiff one's right for you. Okay, if you have any questions or comments, put them down below and I'll try my best to answer them. If not, thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you for the next video. Cheers.